In this section of M1.3.3, let us consider the ethical guidelines governing the clinical research. As discussed in the earlier sections, most of the times the animal research is carried out for drug discovery, toxicity, disease prognosis, and its therapeutic measures, and many such vital issues closely related to the betterment of human life. These animal models serve as the preliminary study subjects, and the further extrapolation of it as well as the confirmation of its application has to be undertaken on human subjects through clinical research. So, it is a very sensitive as well as critical phase of the applied research, for example, translational research. The regulatory framework that exists today regarding the clinical trials that involve human subject is a result of some of the milestones in this regard, such as the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Geneva and Helsinki, the Belmont Report, the Common Rule, and the Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences Guidelines. The Nuremberg Code. After the surrender of Germany that ended the World War II, the Nuremberg trials were held from 1945 to 1947 in response to the atrocities that Nazi Germans committed during the war. The so-called Doctor's Trial represents a major turning point in human research protection. 23 physicians were indicted, accused of crime against humanity by conducting criminal, scientific, and medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners. 16 defendants were found guilty. On April 17, 1947, Dr. Alexander, who had worked with the prosecution during the trial, submitted a memorandum to the United States Council for War Crimes, which outlined 6 points defining legitimate research. The trial verdict given on August 19, 1947, reiterated almost all of these points in a section entitled Permissible Medical Experiments and expanded the original 6 points into 10. These 10 points became known as the Nuremberg Code. The essence of the key 10 points of Nuremberg Code could be briefly summarized as follows. 1. The mandatory informed choice of the human subject. 2. The purposefulness of the experiment, which calls for the imperative use of human subjects. 3. The human trial experiments should be based on the promising results obtained by the prior animal experimentation studies. 4. Avoidance of physical and mental suffering of the volunteers during clinical trials. 5. No trials to be undertaken if there is a possibility of threat to the life of the subjects or of any disability envisaged. 6. The outcome of the clinical trial must never supersede the life of the human subjects, and the priority would always be towards their protection. 7. Those volunteering for human trials should be well looked after and kept in comfortable environment. 8. The clinical trials must be carried out by the well-qualified and well-trained practitioners or professionals throughout the clinical study period. 9. The complete freedom lies with the subjects for termination of the trial studies at any point of time if they experience any physical or mental exhaustion or trauma. 10. The researchers involved in the clinical trial should take a cautious decision to end the experimental studies if they notice any circumstances that would put the health or life of the subjects at danger or may cause injury and or disabilities. The Declaration of Geneva and Helsinki. In 1949, the physicians of the World Medical Association issued a code of medical ethics to condemn what Nazi doctors had done. This code came to be known as the Declaration of Geneva, that laid out general principles to which physicians should hold themselves. To clarify a physician's duties as an investigator, the physicians of WMA discussed and debated further for several years, and the document Ethical Principles for Medical Research Involving Human Subjects was approved in 1964, and this paper became known as Declaration of Helsinki. Meanwhile, the research continued in the United States with particular concerns attached to research involving vulnerable populations, exemplified by numerous studies involving institutionalized children and studies that breached ethically sound research practices. One of such most infamous case is of the US Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee Institute of Macon, Alabama, that was carried out from 1932 to 1972. For the 40 long years, the study enrolled 399 subjects with syphilis and 201 uninfected controls from the African American community surrounding Tuskegee, Alabama. The public outcry over the Tuskegee study and other reports of ethical lapses in both medical and social research raised an alarm for the ethical guidelines to be very stringent whether human subjects were to be used for clinical trials. On May 30th, 1974, the US Department of Health, Education and Welfare, responsible for oversight of the National Institutes of Health, replaced previous policies with comprehensive regulations governing the protection of human subjects. In July 1974, Congress passed the National Research Service Award Act of 1974, and Title II of this Act, Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, created the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects in Biomedical and Behavioral Research. Along with being assigned several other tasks, the National Commission was directed to make recommendations to the DHEW Secretary about the ethical principles that should underlie human subject research. Several reports in response to the directives. The most notable among a collection of important documents is the Belmont Report issued in 1978. This document, consisting of 3 sections, is widely regarded as the landmark analysis of ethics in human subjects research and serves as the foundation for discussion of ethical concerns in research ethics involving human subjects, as well as the source of federal regulation for research established by the Office for Human Research Protection. The Common Rule. In addition to establishing the Belmont Commission for the DHEW, the National Research Act of 1974 established a set of guidelines for research with human subjects. These regulations introduced the concept of Institutional Review Board (IRB) to the process of research funded by DHEW. The Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences Guidelines. Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences, a non-governmental organization founded in 1949, was established to collaborate with the United Nations and its subgroups such as the World Health Organization. After the WMA adopted the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964, the WHO directed CIOMS to translate the declaration into a document that could be used to guide member countries, especially third world countries. The CIOMS manual Proposed International Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical Research Involving Human Subjects was released in 1982. Thus, in most of the countries today, there are institutional review boards, IRBs, which may be recognized by different nomenclature such as Institutional Ethics Committee and others, which are functioning to review the biomedical research involving human subjects and their protections. Let us now consider the cardinal principles of ethics in medical research that were put forth by Beauchamp and Childress. These are autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. These have been extremely influential in the field of medical ethics and are fundamental for understanding the current approach to ethical assessment in healthcare. Let us understand the deeper meaning of the four principles of biomedical ethics, namely autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. Autonomy stands for respect for the person, a notion of human dignity, that is, it stands for acting intentionally after being given sufficient information and time to understand the information, that is, the informed consent of the human subjects. Beneficence is directed to promote the well being of patients and the society. On the other hand, non maleficence implies first do no harm, which can be achieved by careful decision making and having adequate training. Justice deals with equitable distribution of social benefits. Thank you for completing week 1 M1.3.